Hello everybody, welcome to Dim Lights Horror, the podcast that tells classic and modern stories from around the world for you to hear. Now please, take a seat, dim your lights, and join me in today's story by Reddit user Amon7777, Creeping Vines. I was awoken a few weeks ago by a thunderous sound, followed by an earth-shaking rattling of my house. Up here in Saskatchewan, we do not get earthquakes, so to say I was freaked out was to put it mildly. I got out of bed and peered out my window, and there was a light glowing in the distance. The area around me is heavily forested, so I thought it was an explosion or a fire. I called it in, but was told they were aware and it was likely nothing. There had been a nearby mine explosion not too long ago, so it may have been something like that again. I had a terrible night of rest, expecting warning sirens to evacuate based on the fire. The next morning, when I got up, I looked out expecting smoke and a sign of a forest fire, but there were none. After getting a healthy dose of coffee, I went out and spoke with some of my neighbors, and they had heard the sound as well, but had no idea what had occurred either. Other than one complaining of a cracked window, it seemed just one of the random oddities of life. No one else had seen a bright light shining through, which I found strange. Shrugging it off, I went about the 1,000 more pressing things I needed to do. Over the next few days, though, I started to notice some strange things. As I went about my day, there were suddenly a lot more people in town I didn't recognize. Men and women in suits, in cars that were clearly not from the area, were driving around town, asking questions about the occurrence. I thought maybe something big had happened, but there was nothing on the news or online. When I was home, a knock came to my door, and 2 men in suits were standing on my porch. The closest man flashed with an identification, saying that they were from the CSIS, and if I had observed anything strange recently. I told them about the sound and the quake from the previous night, and they asked if I had seen anything else. I told them of the light shining in the forest, and there was a pause. The first man looked back at the second, before thanking me and getting in their car and speeding off. I checked with my neighbors, and if they had spoken to anyone else, and the whole street had. My small town is not the most exciting, so this was quite the gossip on what the heck was going on. The rumor circulated that any of the roads around the forest had checkpoints erected, and police were turning travelers around. No official announcement or news broadcast, though, made everyone concerned. After a few more days of relatively little excitement, I heard from a neighbor that 2 hunters had gone missing in the woods the day before. What was worse was that supposedly no search parties were allowed to go look for them. When I started to look into the forest that backed up to my home, it seemed unusually dark and thick with plant life. I walked into the backyard at one point and started to walk a bit into the trees before my feet couldn't get past the undergrowth. I lived on this property for many years, and I have never once seen anything like it before. Another day passed by, and the other locals were reporting pets missing, and now no one seemed to be able to physically get into the forest areas. Not a single announcement or word about the instances could be found. The mayor's house was having screaming people outside demanding answers constantly. After a group broke a few of their windows, The police had to come and keep watch. The whole damn town was going mad. For me though, I just kept watching my backyard in the forest. Day after day, I'd wake up in the morning and see the thick forest mass had encroached further and closer to my house. Last night was the breaking point. I awoke hearing glass cracking downstairs. Someone must have been in my house, I thought. I picked up my cell and there was no signal. Cursing, I swore I would not be intimidated in my own home and grabbed a heavy mag light. Cracking open my door, the dark of the night offered nothing, switching on the flashlight with an audible click. The hallway outside looked as mundane as ever. Mustering the courage, I ventured forth. As I got closer to the stairs, there was a pungent, organically putrid smell that assaulted my senses. Step by step, I went down the stairs, ready to attack whatever assailants had broken in. When I got to the base of my stairs, the front door seemed untouched. Looking to the right, through my kitchen, which faced the back, took my breath away. There was a mass of spindly and flailing tendrils covering the entire backside of my house. I stood in abject shock, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As I did, my light raced around whatever it was that I was looking at. As I shone my light, one of the tendrils darted out and grabbed me by my ankle, kicking me backwards on the ground. I was being pulled towards the mass, closer to the putrid smelling thing. I flailed and tried to get free, to no success. Using the heavy end of the flashlight, I struck the thing that was wrapped around my ankle, and there was a burst of blood-like fluid from the impact. At that moment, I was free, and I scrambled towards my door. As I looked back, more tendrils were sprouting out of the mass. Whether it was the sheer fear or insanity of it all, I could not be sure. But I swore I saw the outline of a human face pushing up against the fleshy thing. Within a hair's breadth, I got out my front door as the tendrils made a snap in the air, missing me. When I stumbled outside, I ran. I ran down my street, screaming at the top of my lungs for help. As I looked around, the forest mass was all around. The houses around me were being absorbed, just as mine had. A series of gunshots went off nearby, and I reflexively ducked as I looked down the street to see some figures in army uniforms streaming into the area. One grabbed me by my arm as I stood in the middle of the street and pulling me into a truck. Inside, I found a few of my neighbors. All had gaunt visions of horror. A few more gunshots sounded outside, and the truck moved forward. As the truck drove, my mind was shattered on what I had experienced. I'm in a makeshift camp a few miles outside of town. At the moment, they still won't tell us anything about what is going on. If you are reading this, then please, do not go near that forest. Do not trust the light in the forest. Thank you all for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, please leave a comment. I value your feedback. And if you're listening on Spotify, click the follow button to hear more stories from Dim Light's Horror. Good night, everybody.